and taking the time to connect with the community however you can, whatever way makes sense. Looking at the people who have their video on, just that sense that we're here together. And also just that deeper, broader sense of being part of a lineage of human beings that have the good fortune, enough time basically, enough space in our lives to be interested in a deeper way in the truth of suffering and how we're complicit in suffering in our own heart and those around us, like it or not. And we don't contemplate the truth of suffering to be morbid or to feel guilty. We contemplate it in order to better understand what does freedom look like when the world is this way? What does actual freedom in this heart feel like, look like when the world, when my life, when my mind's conditioning is the way that it is? What is the path? Is there a path? And so this is really our great privilege that we get this time now on Sunday morning to contemplate this together in community. And I've mentioned these last couple months, I've been doing out loud an informal reflection on the refuges and precepts. Some of you know that in most of the schools of Buddhism, there's a regular ritual recitation of the 3 refuges and the 5 precepts for lay people. But this more formal recitation is really just meant to be an ongoing reflection. What is my refuge? So I'll just do that out loud so that you can be encouraged at the beginning of your own sits at home, or at any time really, in the morning when you wake up, at night before you go to sleep, to contemplate the 3 refuges and reassert in our hearts our commitment to non-harming through the 5 precepts. And in this way, and it's really true with the whole path that the Buddha laid out, the whole point is to become independent, not to become dependent on a teacher, a lineage, or teachings. As useful as those things are, maybe even a lot of the time they may be essential, but the aspiration is to become independent, to internalize the wisdom and the understanding, so we can walk our path, walk our talk. It's true also with the refuges. So modeling now, just taking refuge in the Buddha, taking refuge in this heart, this mind's capacity to be present, to be open and receptive right now. And please just follow along, contemplating in your own heart and mind this capacity right now, right here, to be open, to be awake, to be willing to feel and see and know, and recognizing how valuable this capacity to be awake. That's what Buddha means, to be awake. It isn't abstract, it isn't theoretical. The word and taking refuge in the Buddha, it's really something here and now, and that's really important that we explore that. What might that word Buddha actually point to that's here and now? A wakefulness that's not dependent on whatever it is that's being known or being felt. And we take refuge in the Dhamma. So in some ways that word Dhamma or Dharma means trusting the way that it is. So Buddha wakes up to Dhamma, Dharma, both the beauty and the goodness here and now, but also whatever is ugly or hard to be with, including just our unavoidable complicity in the suffering in our families, our own suffering, the suffering in our wider world that we're part of, the injustices and oppression, systems of oppression. So when we use Buddha to be intimate with Dhamma, we're not picking and choosing the pretty parts of the way it is. So we're realizing that Buddha can really include everything. And so just exploring that, I'll just mention part of what we can do to sort of open up this experience of the way that it is. I'm sure you've noticed that sometimes at the beginning of programs, public programs here at Common Ground at times, we do what sometimes is called a land acknowledgement. So part of opening to the way it is realizing that here in Minneapolis, where I am, I'm on the land of the Dakota people. And this was treated land and unceded land of this nation, this group of people. And as probably most of you know, well, hopefully, through genocide, through, military occupation, through all kinds of unskillful means, we're on this land. And that's just how it is. And we want to, Buddha opening to Dhamma means acknowledging just the layer upon layer of suffering and injustice. Like that part of our economic wealth is based on colonialism and slavery and other just sort of economic injustices that we derive our well-being from. And again, it isn't about getting tight. It's just about being real with what it is to be a human being. Can there be Buddha that can open to Dhamma the way that it is? So it's not just being aware of the ambient sounds in the room or the feeling of the body sitting, as important as that is, and whether the hands are cool or warm. But it means in a deeper and a broader sense, feeling the more subtle reverberations in our heart, the subtle reverberation of guilt or the subtle reverberation of denial, the tightness of denial, numbness, whatever it might be. And this is especially relevant for some in our community, maybe many in our community, due to the recent deaths of 8 people in Atlanta, 6 of whom folks of Asian descent, women of Asian descent. And it just, like part of Buddha knowing Dhamma is understanding the reality of impact. Like there are people in our community, maybe you yourself, that are feeling some impact right now because of those killings or many, many other reasons. Some of beautiful things might have happened to folks. So part of what we're waking up to, Buddha is waking up to all of the impact, all the sensitivity of our hearts. Right? We know that some people are brokenhearted right now, maybe because of a breakup, or maybe being part of a group that feels cornered or oppressed in one way or another. Can we be intimate with that too? Can we include that too, including our complicity, just being part of this society? How do we take responsibility for what's moving, all the good and all the oppression and the injustice? How can we inhabit the space of our lives with compassion, with wisdom? And that's really what allows for the third refuge. So Buddha wakes up to Dhamma, and that allows for the third refuge of Sangha. So Sangha is our actions and our words and our thoughts that arise from this intimacy of Buddha being open to Dhamma. So learning how to move and respond in a nimble, balanced, not contrived way. How to become a force of nature in terms of our words, our thoughts, our actions. That force of nature arising out of being present. And not needing to put any particular spin on the way it is. Which is why we rely, Sangha, this sort of skillful engagement, relies on Buddha being awake to Dhamma. So that's what taking refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha mean. And then, of course, we get tenderized just reflecting on our refuges. And what flows from this is a deep, resonant commitment to not harming. Appreciating the reality of suffering. Why would I want to be part of planting more seeds for suffering, for harm in the world? So we resolve in a deep way to refrain from causing harm through our thoughts, words, and deeds. We aspire, not that it's even possible to live without causing harm, but it's still a beautiful aspiration, and not to take what hasn't been given to us, even though we might want it. And to be particularly aware of this part of our lives of sexuality, because it's such a tender, exposed place. So we want to really commit to not causing harm through our sexual activities. And also through our words, another one of those places where it's very easy to cause harm. Undertaking the training to refrain from using my words in ways that cause harm, by lying or misspeaking, using words as a kind of weapon to hurt somebody, or even using words as a sort of filling up space, like idle words, things that don't really need to be said, just end up confusing the moment. And finally, undertaking the training to refrain from intoxicating the mind in ways that make me careless, more likely to cause harm. These are the 5 trainings that go with the precepts. Really just different ways of operationalizing this valuing of non-harming. So we'll settle into our meditation time now. And I thought we would do a compassion meditation as a way into the last instructions, the last 2 sets of 4 instructions from the Buddha on mindfulness of breathing. We'll take the first 10 or 15 minutes and we'll realize as best we can, that this heart has a way of connecting with a natural tenderness, a natural compassion. I will abide, keeping in mind, pervading this heart with this compassion, this heart imbued, suffused with a tender-heartedness, due to being connected with my own suffering and the suffering of those around me. Everywhere, in all ways, including to myself, I will abide, pervading this world of ours with this heart imbued with compassion, this balanced tenderness, abundant, beautiful, boundless compassion, free from fear, free from ill will. I will abide. And we're accessing a tender-heartedness that's moved when we see something simple like a crocus trying to poke its way through a bunch of dead leaves. Or we read another article about somebody facing real suffering of loss, of physical pain, of injustice. Or a dear friend dealing with cancer or physical illness, or a breakup. I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, the hearts of my friends, the hearts of those in my community, burdened with suffering, as well as my own suffering, my own anxiety, the uneasiness in this heart. I will abide, making space, this loving, compassionate space that knows how to be present to suffering, fearless, buoyant, enlivened, compassion. May this heart, may all hearts find their way, given the truth of suffering. May wisdom and love protect us always. So with compassion meditation, we're using particular images and phrases, words, to uncover and to remember this heart's capacity for this love of compassion. But we're really moving toward resting, trusting, and actually being compassion instead of trying to do it. Abiding with this tender heart that cares, that wishes well, that isn't afraid of the very real suffering, isn't afraid to show up, to do what can be done if there's something that can be done. So it's a confidence move. We have to find our confidence that this heart is actually capable of caring for our own well-being and for the well-being of others, the well-being of everyone. And feeling that abundant, that radiant goodness we call compassion, and learning to abide there. Allow it to spread everywhere in every way. And really do your best to sense the great boundless space of love, the love of compassion, caring about being touched and caring about the very real suffering here and everywhere. Compassion knows how to meet and show up, knows and not afraid to be sensitive. Be afraid to use a phrase, to repeat a phrase, or bring up an image that reminds the heart of this capacity. I will abide, pervading all corners, internal, external, with this heart suffused with compassion. Everywhere and every way, I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world with compassion, abundant, beautiful, enlivening compassion. Doing our best, doing our best to abide in this boundless space of tender-heartedness, compassion. And even if you notice some resistance, some hardness of heart, you might be able to have compassion for that too. Oh yeah, that's how it is sometimes. The heart resists. The heart's afraid. The heart feels needy, and I care about that. May wisdom and love guide and protect you, Mark. May you be at ease in this tender world. Something like that. And remember to do your best to transition from doing compassion practice to just resting in the vast, beautiful space of compassion, the great ocean of compassion, tenderness. Nothing is excluded. The sitting body is met with compassion. The room we're in, the beings that are close to us now, and the wide world, seen and unseen beings, everybody gets included. So noticing this space, boundless space of compassion, appreciating it, noticing the great stillness, even peace of this space of compassion that can hold, meet, and respond to everything. And that this love of compassion is really nature, not self. There's no need for any ownership or self-identity. Just allowing this boundless space of compassion to be nature. It's what it is. The inclusive, tender nature of the heart, of the mind. And from this wholesome, relatively wholesome, settled place, we pick up the Buddha's instructions, the last four. One trains oneself while breathing in, contemplating the truth of impermanence, the truth of uncertainty. One trains oneself when breathing out, contemplating, keeping in mind the truth of impermanence, of uncertainty. So just do your best, whether you're aware of the changing nature of thought or emotion or sensation or view. Keeping in mind the absence of fixed ground. This whole world spinning with birth and death and life eating life, and the way that power moves and takes advantage of and then is overthrown, and then on and on and on. And instead of being on the level of our thoughts about things, notice how the phenomenon of thought itself is pretty insubstantial. How long does a thought remain? Even a mood or a particular emotion, how long does that stay present? Let alone a thought, a sensation, a sound. So again, it doesn't really matter what you're aware of. You can always come back to awareness of breathing in and breathing out. But whatever it is that the mind is knowing, being particularly interested in the truth of change, the uncertainty of whatever it is that's being known. And even if there is in a moment a sense of conviction, certainty about something, even the thought, this is stupid, it might be real conviction for a moment, but if awareness just continues to be aware, you'll notice that that just evaporates, that conviction, that thought seems so real and substantial, and then it's gone. Of course, the mind can regenerate it, but whatever it regenerates, it will also be ephemeral. But we tend not to notice that. So, this 13th instruction, the Buddha is simply asking us to keep it in mind. As we're breathing in, keep in mind the truth of change, the insubstantial, uncertain nature of any phenomenon. And as we breathe out, same thing. So we're simply curious about this changing nature. Anicca is the Pali word. How the breath is a constant process of change as it comes in and goes out. Same with any thought, any sound, any other experience. Can we keep that truth of change or uncertainty in mind? And then what happens when we keep it in mind? So again, it's not about looking for change. It's more noticing what the mind is knowing and noticing how that experience is characterized by change, whatever it is that the mind is knowing. One of my teachers sums up all the instructions in this simple way. Keep calmly knowing change. And if ever some experience seems immune to change or substantial in some way, and don't try to force it to change, just be curious about it. This open curiosity. What is the nature of this experience? Is it fixed? Is it self, me or mine? Or is it also changing, uncertain, ephemeral? So we don't have to force anything, just be curious. And take a moment and adjust your body, whatever you feel like you need to do to be comfortable. Nice to be with everybody this morning. And for people who are joining us for the first time or one of the first times, a big welcome to you. And we've been studying this winter and now spring, we've been studying the Buddha's instructions on mindfulness of breathing, one of the more complete set of instructions that the Buddha gave during his many years of teaching, some 2,500 years ago in northern India. And today you might have noticed in the guided meditation, we took a different pathway into the later instructions. Out of those 16 instructions, we did the mindfulness of compassion practice, right? Keeping compassion in mind creatively. There's a lot of creativity in the Brahma Viharas, the divine abodes of loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity. These are the 4 qualities of the heart. And one way or another, we find our way back to an authentic attitude, uncontrived attitude of kindness, or today we did compassion. And then using images or words, we keep it in mind until it feels clear enough. We trust the attitude of compassion enough that we stop trying to do it and we just relax and, in a sense, abide in that pervading, wholesome, radiant quality of compassion, like a light, a warm, tender-hearted light that just shines, touching the experience of our body, touching our own heart and mind, touching the world and everyone in it. But it's like I mentioned in the guided meditation, it's a bit of a confidence move where we have to bring up some memories maybe, or bring up your puppy that is hurting, and the compassion flows very naturally toward that 4-legged friend. And you remember that, and in remembering that relationship with that particular being or whoever, whatever, then the mind is able to make the simple step of, I care about that being, to, oh, this is the experience of caring. This is that quality the Buddha calls, or we call, compassion. Oh, let me keep it in mind. And it has a felt sense, like a actual blossoming in a way of the heart, tenderheartedness, that just has a nature, a felt sense of expansion, boundlessness. The very experience of real love, spiritual love, is that it doesn't have boundaries. It might start by remembering a particular relationship with a particular person, but the more we sense the love or the compassion, the more we sense that it includes everything and everyone. And it's a practice like everything else, and we get better at it when we do it. And it's a little bit like I sometimes joke about mindfulness practice. It's amazing that we have a mind and we have a present moment, but we haven't been interested in it. And in a similar way, it's amazing that we have this capacity for these beautiful attitudes of kindness and compassion and appreciative joy and equanimity, but we haven't been that interested in them. And they feel so good when the mind is established in compassion. It just feels really good. I mean, we will be sensitive to the very real truth of suffering, but it's an enlivening attitude. It feels good. It feels healing to be in any of those 4 attitudes of love: basic friendliness, kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity. And then it's a very natural thing when we have some confidence in the boundlessness of compassion, or any of the 4, right? And having some sense of resting, abiding in a radiant, inclusive love, whatever it is, however strong that might be, then it's a relatively easy step into the third set of instructions that we've been studying. So if you don't remember, it's good to memorize these 16. So I'll just go through all 16, right? So first we're establishing mindfulness. Now we didn't do the first 8 today. So we're aware of breathing in and breathing out, right? In an exclusive way. So we have to drop our attention to everything else for the first few instructions, right? Just aware of the physicality, breathing in and out, and discerning whether it's relatively long or short. So that requires an even more close tracking of breathing in and out. To do that as discernment, is it a longer breath, a shorter breath, a rougher breath, a smoother breath, right? And then when we've dropped the world and we've just been attending to the physicality of breath, then the mind is already somewhat secluded. So then we open to the whole body. So the Buddha says, we train ourselves breathing in, experiencing the whole body, breathing out, experiencing the whole body. And then breathing in, calming the body, breathing out, calming the body. And that's the first 4. And it's a healing of the mind and body. And then with that kind of being more in the moment, then wisdom is aware of the flow of the moment. And that really is the gateway to joy. That's the 5th. Breathing in, experiencing joy. Breathing out, experiencing joy. That the moment, you're not doing it and I'm not doing it, but the moment is alive. It's moving. The body's moving, the mind is moving, the mental activity rather is moving. Everything's alive. And that kind of, when the heart opens to that, it's like, whoa, it's enlivening, joyful interest, rapture even, the sense of flow, energetic movements, which is what we call rapture. And this is just the mind recognizing how alive, and feelings of lightness and buoyancy. And then that matures into ease, the next step, breathing in, experiencing the ease of the heart, breathing out, experiencing the ease of the heart, then noticing the activity of mind from this place of contentment, noticing, oh yeah, there's thinking, there's experiencing, there's perceiving, there's this so-called mental activity. And then the quieting of that mental activity, precisely because the mind is relating to the mental activity with a lot of dispassion, a lot of space. Oh yeah, it's just thought. And that's the second set of 4. Wisdom is really looking at the activity of the mind, just like with the first set of 4, looking at the activity of the body. Now with the third, and this is where the compassion practice, if you like doing metta, loving kindness, or compassion, karuna practice, then you can do that, get to as best you can, that state of the space of love, the space of compassion, and then recognize the space of love is the space of the mind. Oh, breathing in, experiencing the space of the mind, the space of the loving mind. Breathing out, gladdening that, appreciating that, stilling that, quieting that, concentrating that, liberating that space of the mind. Seeing its selfless nature, not self. Love is not personal. It's there, it's beautiful, it's healing, but I'm not doing it. There isn't a person doing it. It's the nature of the mind to be inclusive in that way. We forget it, and we live in pretty narrow places a lot of the time, right? But that doesn't mean it isn't there. It's just unrecognized. It remains unrecognized a lot of the time because we operate in our fixed views or self-centered views or fears with our fears and our greed. And that really restricts the nature of our knowing mind when we're identified with these ideas, basically, of who we are and what's going on. But when we get out of that, then we're really doing that third set of 4 instructions, experiencing the mind, appreciating the space of the mind, the knowing mind, the loving mind, concentrating it, liberating it, really seeing it empty of self, empty of selfing, empty of self-centeredness. That's a realization that whatever is there in the mind, it's nature and not self. And, the way insight works, the sort of learning, the deep spiritual learning, seeing what we haven't seen before, and this is true anytime with learning, learning happens when there's contrast. So if we're in that really beautiful, empty, refined state, then from that place, it's really easy, relatively easy, to learn about the nature of the mind. So from that point, then, we study. This is the last set of 4. And what are we studying? So the changes from, one trains oneself, breathing in, experiencing the mind, gladdening the mind. Now it goes to contemplating. So there are 4 contemplations. We're contemplating impermanence, contemplating dispassion, contemplating cessation, contemplating letting go. And that's the last 4 instructions. And of course, it's ideal, like, to do this in a place where the mind is very quiet, very beautiful, very refined. But we can do it, it's good to do it all day long, even when our mind isn't so settled, right? So, but, it's more impactful in terms of transforming and uprooting the unhelpful habits of our mind. The more concentrated, the more settled the mind, the more profound the spiritual work we're doing when we bring impermanence to mind, notice the dispassion, notice the cessation, and notice the letting go. So I want to talk about these steps today with our remaining time. So, of course, the point of the 4th set of 4 instructions is to address in a very deep way the truth of suffering. And that's the issue at hand. It's always a clarifying question. What's the problem we're trying to solve in life? And, we realize that my heart's burdened and tight. And when my heart feels burdened and tight and anxious and fearful and needy, then I'm sort of in the mode, it sort of activates me in ways that aren't helpful. And it might be good just to review. Wynn and I listened to On Being. Some of you know that program hosted by Krista Tippett's, been on public radio for a long time now. It's a good show, and she interviews various spiritual, religious, in this case, a clinical psychologist named Christine Runyon. And it's really good just to sort of review some of the basic principles of Western psychology, and just the how the stress, the autonomic nervous response operates. We get numb, we lose the capacity for empathy, our thinking gets rigid, we ruminate, we get dysregulated, we become less productive. These are some of the things she mentioned this morning. Now, given what's been happening this last year in small and big ways in our lives, this should sound somewhat familiar, right? And financial stress and the stress in our communities as we've seem to be taking a more honest look at racism in our communities, and just the destruction of the COVID virus and all the death and all the sickness and just the anxiety of having to walk around with masks on and all of the other things that have been moving in our lives recently, right? So we experience, probably to some degree, all of us, this unavoidable activation of stress. And this stress gets chronic, where we're so in that sort of tight place that our own tightness is the stress we're managing. And how do we manage our tightness? We get tight about it. And you see that basic formula of being tight and then noticing we're tight and getting tight because we're tight. That's a very simple way of talking about what in Buddhism we call samsara, the cycles of suffering, how suffering begets suffering. That's the problem we're trying to solve. We see it in ourselves, hopefully. We observe it in others, we see it in our society, and we see it expressing itself in really tragic ways where the truth of suffering collectively and individually causes us to plant seeds for more suffering. When we're tight, we tend to act out in ways that make ourselves and others tight. And on it goes. And just to begin to do this work, as you see with the first 8 steps in the Buddha's instructions, but even before we get to the 16 steps, like I'm sure you've noticed, the first step is not easy. For the Buddha, right at the beginning, if you don't remember, the Buddha says, okay, friends, establish mindfulness to the fore. Well, that's pretty challenging. Just for the mind to be interested and recognize, oh, this is being known. Breathing in is being known. Right? When we're activated, it's not so easy to do that. So we need to take a deep breath, right? Some of these simple things we've learned, and again, this person, Christine Runyon, reviewed, but this is probably not new to any of us. Take a deep breath and really pay attention to the exhalation, especially because that just triggers the releasing response, the parasympathetic nervous system. Just being just exhaling in a deeper conscious way, right? And there's so many other things. Like one of the things we do a lot in our practice, but this psychologist mentioned, is just naming our experience, because it creates a little space. Oh, my mind is really anxious, right? Like in the early Buddhist teachings, it's like, Mara, I see you. I don't know if any of you know that from the suttas, from the discourses. But even the Buddha, this awakened person, when old psychological patterns, internal or around him, difficult stuff arose, the Buddha would say to himself, oh, Mara, I see you. Yeah, that's what's showing up right now. That's how it is right now. Whether it's an internal emotional pattern or an external thing happening in the room, in the community around you, oh yeah, this is what's happening. And there's something really that helps that regulation, that sort of settling, just to name the way it is. Oh, this is what's happening. And it's not about, it's not encouraging a numbness or a disassociation or kind of the shadow of like what doesn't matter because it's just this being known. So it's not that, it's actually helping us connect when we name what's going on. When we know what's going on, then the heart can actually choose to be open and to feel what it feels like that this is going on. Oh, I'm really anxious. I'm really excited. I'm really hopeful. I'm really afraid. I'm really humiliated. I really want this person to like me. That's what's happening now. And it feels like this. I really want that person to see me, recognize me, like me. This is what that feels like. It's so grounding just to simply name. And this is a big part of the Buddhist tradition, is whether you actually name, like silently in your mind, you use those words, oh, this is being known, or you just recognize, you just notice. But it's really important for us to have that sort of spacious acknowledgement. This is what's happening. It's so grounding. And another thing this psychologist mentioned today, which again, it's just built into the Buddhist teachings, it's so important that we don't just keep looking at what's difficult, but we also need to acknowledge what's pleasant, because it breaks the cycle of rumination and spinning, when we're caught up in our anxiety, in our dependence or neediness or whatever it might be, just to ask ourselves, well, what's around in the present moment that I can be aware of that would be pleasant? Well, maybe I'll take a walk around the block and I'll notice the sunshine and I'll notice the sounds. Or maybe I'll put on a piece of music that I like and I'll notice how pleasant that is. Because when we're in our self-centered dramas, not always, but a lot of them are self-centered dramas, really we're in this vortex of looking at pain, something that's painful, reacting to it, which is painful, looking at pain, reacting to it, and it just keeps going. And that can be the rumination or the cycling, the spinning. So to just have a cup of tea and to really notice the warmth of the cup and how comfortable it is to be sitting looking out the window and to taste the sweetness of the honey, something as simple as that can break that cycle. Because it's somehow, if we have this sort of overlapping view that I'm going to hell, that nothing works, that everything's bad, and then we on purpose notice something that's pleasant and notice the response, the natural organic response to pleasantness, which is to go, this is pleasant, right? Because just even if it's brief, when we're in a pleasant experience, with a pleasant experience, there's some momentary contentment. Like right now, for this moment, I don't need things to be different. And that just as a reminder, can be a potent reminder of, oh, this is what it feels like not to be struggling to make things different. So it's just a skillful use of pleasantness, even touching ourselves in a wholesome way, rubbing our chest or just touching in this way, or, affection. If you have somebody you're living with where you don't have to, you can, ask for that kind of physical affection. If we were some of the other primates, we'd pick the lice out of each other's fur, or something like that. But we have these ways that are that are soothing for our nervous system, and being in connection with another human being or a four-legged being can really help in these ways. Just the physical affection, and these are just getting us to the place where we can do the other, 16 steps that I just ran through for all of us, right? Because if we're activated and then we pick up the first instruction to establish mindfulness to the fore and to be aware of the breath coming in and aware of the breath going out, and to track it with enough discernment to know whether it's a longer or shorter, a rougher or smoother breath, a more usual or a more refined breath, we're just not going to be able to do it. Because we're basically living as a cornered animal. Well, you can't ask a cornered animal to be aware of even something as simple as the breathing in and breathing out. Because what a corner animal wants is they want to escape the threat, even if the threat is something that they're imagining. Because the mind doesn't really know the difference between what it imagines and what we would say is true in our consensual reality. Like there's actually a predator out to get me, right? We don't really know the difference. That's what a nightmare is, right? Whether it's a waking nightmare or one that happens when we're asleep, the physiological response is really the same. The stress response, fight, flight, freeze. Someone even added recently, follow, like, tell me what to do. It's, I think, related to that freeze where we don't know what to do. And so anybody who asserts they know what to do, we tend to follow them, which maybe says something about our politics these days. But this is the truth of all of us being activated. So I want to spend a little time before we end just talking about the last tetrad that I mentioned already, where we're contemplating impermanence, contemplating dispassion, contemplating cessation, and contemplating relinquishment or letting go. And obviously, this is the most subtle practice that we're ever going to do in practice, but we want to think of it not just something that we do in the quietness of our meditation, but something that we can develop confidence in all day long. And that will really support those more refined moments when the mind, heart, body is really settled down and the quality of awareness is pretty pure. Just like those deeper, more quiet moments of doing the practice of looking at impermanence, dispassion, cessation, and letting go, really supports the daily life practice. Because it really comes to what I was talking about right at the beginning when I reviewed the Refuges, Buddha knowing Dhamma, that the whole premise of the path the Buddha set in motion was this realization from his own life that when I cultivate that stability of present moment awareness, and then I use reality, like I show up to reality with that balanced, sensitive continuity of present moment awareness. It's the combination of Buddha being intimate with Dhamma that leads to insight. So we need Dhamma, we need the way it is. And just like in terms of our daily life, we don't need to be afraid of the messiness and the painfulness and the humiliation of seeing the way it is. And like I mentioned at the beginning, when we're more honest about complicity, and this isn't specific to like myself as a white person, a male, a straight male, we're all complicit in different ways, of course, in the suffering that's spinning, in the injustice, in the oppression, right? So we it's just about getting close and being real so that we can respond and discover the freedom in that responsivity. And this is really what Buddha knowing Dhamma is all about. We often think of it as something that just happens when we're in that proverbial cave in the mountains, nobody bothering us, perfect conditions, with tranquil animals around and somebody bringing us food, and and we're just doing the sort of stereotypic work of meditation. But in the traditions, it's always about then, well, what happens then? What does that insight look like when you come back into the complexity of relationship, into the historic trauma that we're all carrying, having, because we're in this world where life eats life, where power rules, right? And because of the predominance of the survival instinct, people and other beings do whatever they have to, in moments at least, to survive. And often that is perpetuating violence on others, taking advantage of others. It's always been this way. And the only thing that can make things better is to cultivate a very honest, clear-minded, open-hearted relationship. And it's this insight that happens with the studying of impermanence, studying, contemplating, dispassion, cessation, and letting go that really help. Because that word, let's just look at that word dispassion or disenchantment first. And that may be all we have time for today. And we'll come back to this last set of 4 instructions next week too. So we're not done yet. But when we choose to study the truth of impermanence, everything's uncertain, it's unreliable, it's ephemeral, nothing is fixed, whether it's an idea in my mind or a relationship in my life. All relationships, even the most so-called stable or wholesome relationships, they're an unfolding process. They're not fixed. And in that sense, they're not reliable, they're not governable. You may think you can govern the relationship you have with your child or your partner or your pet or your job, but it's fundamentally, essentially ungovernable and unreliable and uncertain. And we're always surprised when when that's revealed to us, like, I didn't see that coming. But if we had really been a good student of life, we wouldn't have been as surprised, because that's the fruit of being a good student of life. Nothing surprises us. Because when we study life, the essential insight is anything can happen, right? Anything can happen. And there are so many causes and conditions in play that we're oblivious to. We don't even know what's going to happen. Sometimes we have some intuition. Sometimes we can kind of sense what's in motion, but it's never perfect sensing. So what is dispassion? Because it can sound like, oh, I don't care anymore. Life is so ephemeral, so insubstantial, so uncertain that I know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to stop caring about life because I can't count on it. So why bother? But it's really like this insight into dispassion. It's really understanding that we don't have to get tight because things are uncertain and unreliable. So it's like another option. If you don't like to call that dispassion or disenchantment, but the dispassion and disenchantment is just pointing to, you know what? Just because things are changing and ephemeral and uncertain, does my heart have to be tight about that? Let me just see. Can I relax with the truth of unreliableness and ungovernableness and uncertainty? Yeah, I can relax. It's always been that way. Seems like it's going to always be that way. Maybe it's okay that it's this way. So that's what dispassion is. It's an insight. It's the realization that the truth of change doesn't necessarily have to lead to being tight. And that's something we can explore all day long. You go to work, somebody flips the table, and the day you thought you were going to have isn't going to happen, and you can just like contemplate dispassion. Do I need to get tight? I can get tight. Be totally understandable if I get tight because this thing happened that I didn't expect. But maybe I don't have to be tight. And this is something that folks who can stay for the small groups this morning, you might want to share both. When you were somewhat aware of change, the uncertainty, the unreliableness of life, and you to some degree saw that choice in your mind. I can get tight, or I can just let it be what it is. It doesn't mean you didn't choose to get tight, because sometimes the force of habit, even when you see there's a choice, the mind still goes here towards getting tight because that's its habit, to freak out, to strike back with aversion, to, all the different expressions of being tight. But this is the beginning, just to see that there's an option here. When we begin to wake up, when Buddha is intimate with Dhamma, and in this case, intimate with the truth of change, right? Then we see that there's a choice to get tight with aversion, reactivity, numbness, closing down, freezing up, or to just be nimble and relaxed and responsive and do what needs to be done to take care of everybody. And we call that a dispassion. The dispassion is towards the impermanence, not a dispassion towards life, responsibility, taking care of everyone, right? We're dispassionate, we're okay with impermanence. We're disenchanted, meaning we're no longer enchanted with the idea that things are the way I want them to be, the way that they should be. I think they should be, right? I don't live with enchantment anymore. I'm grounded. I'm real. So we have to kind of really work on how we're going to use those words of disenchantment and dispassion. So thanks for being here, everybody. A couple announcements. Not this coming Monday, but the following Monday, the 29th, Stacy McClendon and Ayo Utende, two of our teachers, Dharma teachers at the center, wonderful folks, will be creating a truth and justice vigil. The first time will be on Monday night, and then from then on, it will be Tuesday evenings for a number of weeks, just helping to hold space, especially for people who are feeling what's moving with the trials of the officers and just the ongoing trauma that's more on the surface with the injustices in our society around race and just other forces of injustice. So feel free to join. And Stacy McClendon, just recently retired board chair of Common Ground Meditation Center's board of directors for the last 6 years, and also one of our Dharma teachers. She's gathered both both from town here in Minneapolis and St. Paul, but also around the country, a group of Black Dharma teachers to kind of work together over these weeks to lead that Truth and Justice Vigil, just holding space for all that's moving in our hearts over the next week. So feel free to join in for that. You might want to check it out. There's a day-long retreat this coming Saturday, the 27th. I'll be leading that, as well as the half-day retreat on April 3rd. And as always, Wynn and I will do a practice check-in this afternoon. Time to ask your questions. Stacy and I do one on Tuesday at 12 noon, and Shelley Graff does one at 9 a.m. on Thursday mornings. Ramesh does twice a month on Saturday at 10:30, and you can find all of that in our weekly calendar.